Penelope Ashford's mother said she spent too much time staring at clouds when there was laundry to fold. Her father said she wasted hours imagining adventures when she should be learning to keep proper accounts. And her intended husband said a woman with her head in the clouds would never make a sensible wife. That was why, on a bitter February morning in 1875, Penelope found herself on a stagecoach headed to Cody, Wyoming, having broken her engagement 3 days before the wedding, and fled Philadelphia with nothing but 2 carpet bags and her grandmother's silver locket. The decision had cost her everything she knew, but as the vast mountains rose before her like giants guarding secrets, she felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest that might have been freedom. The stagecoach lurched over another rut in the frozen road, and Penelope pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the wilderness unfold in shades of white and gray and the deep green of pine. She had answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Cody, a town barely 5 years old, nestled in a valley where the Shoshone River ran cold and fast. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, had warned her about the isolation, the harsh winters, the rough men who populated frontier towns. They spoke as if trying to frighten her back to civilization, but Penelope only smiled and returned to the book in her lap, though she barely saw the words. The truth was that she had been frightened her entire life. Frightened of disappointing her parents, frightened of becoming invisible in a loveless marriage, frightened of waking up at 50 and realizing she had never truly lived. Her daydreams had been her only rebellion, small windows into lives she might have led. In them she rode horses across open plains. She discovered hidden valleys. She spoke her mind without apology. Her family had dismissed these dreams as childish fancy, something she would outgrow once the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood settled on her shoulders like a yoke. But 3 nights before her wedding, Penelope had looked at her reflection in her bedroom mirror, wearing the white dress her mother had commissioned, and seen a stranger. The woman in the mirror had empty eyes and a practiced smile. That woman would serve tea and produce children, and never once admit she wanted more than what was expected. Penelope had removed the dress with shaking hands, packed her bags in the dark, and left a letter on her pillow. By morning, she was on a train heading west. The stagecoach pulled into Cody just as the winter sun was beginning its descent, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. The town was smaller than Penelope had imagined, just a single main street lined with wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. But beyond the town, the mountains rose in magnificent peaks, and the air had a clarity she had never experienced in the smoke-choked streets of Philadelphia. A man in a sheepskin coat helped her down from the stagecoach, introducing himself as Thomas Brennan, the owner of the general store and head of the town council. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, but they held a trace of worry as they took in her expensive traveling dress and delicate boots. "Miss Ashford, we are pleased to have you. Though I must be honest that the position may not be what you are accustomed to," he said, carrying her bags toward a small building at the end of the street. "The schoolhouse is modest and the children are rough around the edges. Many of them have never sat in a proper classroom." "That is perfectly fine, Mr. Brennan," Penelope said, lifting her skirts to avoid a patch of ice. "I am not here to maintain what I was accustomed to. I am here to discover what I might become." He gave her a curious look, but said nothing more until they reached a small cabin behind the schoolhouse. The cabin was simple, just 2 rooms with a potbelly stove and basic furniture, but it had a window that looked toward the mountains, and Penelope loved it immediately. "The school board provides your lodging and a salary of $15 a month," Mr. Brennan said, setting her bags inside. "Classes start at 8 in the morning, 6 days a week. There is a church service on Sunday that most folks attend." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Ashford, Cody is not like the cities back east. Life here is hard, and people can be hard too. If you find this is not what you hoped for, we can arrange passage back within the month." Penelope turned from the window and met his eyes squarely. "I will not be returning, Mr. Brennan. Whatever awaits me here, I will face it." He nodded slowly, a smile tugging at his weathered face. "Then welcome to Cody, Miss Ashford. I think you might just survive after all." That night, Penelope lay in the narrow bed, wrapped in quilts that smelled of cedar, and listened to the wind howling through the valley. She should have been terrified, alone in a wild place among strangers, with no family to return to even if she wanted. Instead, she felt awake for the first time in her 22 years, as if she had been sleepwalking through someone else's life and had finally opened her eyes. The schoolhouse the next morning was indeed modest, barely more than a single room with a wood stove, rough benches, and a chalkboard that had seen better days. Penelope arrived early, building up the fire and arranging the few books she had brought from Philadelphia on the teacher's desk. She had just finished writing the alphabet on the board when the door opened and children began filing in. They came in all sizes and states of cleanliness, from a tiny girl of perhaps 5 with braids and a serious expression to a gangly boy of 14 who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. They stared at Penelope with open curiosity. Taking in her neat gray dress and carefully pinned hair, she could see them making judgments, wondering if she would last or if she would flee at the first sign of difficulty like the teacher before her apparently had. "Good morning," Penelope said, keeping her voice steady and warm. "My name is Miss Ashford, and I am pleased to meet all of you. I have come from Philadelphia to be your teacher, and I hope we will learn many interesting things together." A boy in the back, perhaps 10 years old with a mop of red hair, raised his hand. "My pa says you are a city girl who will not last 2 weeks once you see how rough we are." Several children giggled, but Penelope only smiled. "Your father may be right. I am indeed a city girl, and I have much to learn about living in Wyoming. Perhaps you could all teach me about your home, and I can teach you about letters and numbers and all the things I know. That seems like a fair trade." The children seemed surprised by this answer, and the tension in the room eased slightly. Penelope took attendance, learning names and faces, and then began her first lesson. She quickly discovered that the children's education was wildly uneven. Some could barely write their names, while others could read simple passages. She would need to teach multiple levels at once, a challenge that would have overwhelmed her a week ago. But now, standing in this rough schoolhouse with the mountains visible through the window, she felt energized by the task. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and questions, and the constant work of keeping the fire fed against the brutal cold. At noon, the children pulled out lunches from tin pails, and Penelope shared the bread and cheese Mr. Brennan's wife had provided. The small girl with braids, whose name was Sarah, sat close to Penelope and asked if it was true that in Philadelphia there were buildings so tall they touched the sky. "Not quite that tall," Penelope said, "but very impressive. Some are 4 or 5 stories high." Sarah's eyes went wide. "I want to see a city someday. I want to ride in a real carriage and wear a fancy dress and eat cake every day." "Those are wonderful dreams," Penelope said. "You should hold on to them." "My ma says dreaming does not put food on the table," Sarah said, her voice taking on a reciting quality, as if repeating words she had heard many times. "She says I need to keep my head out of the clouds and learn to be practical." Penelope felt something twist in her chest. "Being practical is important," she said carefully, "but so is dreaming. Dreams give us something to work toward. They help us imagine what might be possible." The afternoon lessons went smoothly until the gangly boy, whose name was Thomas Jr., got into a fight with another student over a borrowed pencil. Penelope separated them with a firm voice, surprised by her own authority. She had never disciplined anyone in her life, but somehow she found the words, making both boys shake hands and apologize. When the school day ended at 4, Penelope was exhausted but satisfied. The children filed out into the cold, and she was cleaning the chalkboard when the door opened again. She turned, expecting a forgotten student, and found herself facing a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they strained against his heavy coat. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, windblown and untamed. His face was hard planes and strong angles, covered in several days' worth of beard, and his eyes were a startling blue-gray like a winter sky. He looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves, all raw strength and rough edges. "You are the new teacher," he said. It was not a question, and his voice was deep and gravelly, as if he did not use it often. "I am Miss Ashford," Penelope said, setting down the eraser. Her heart was beating faster, though she told herself it was just surprise at the unexpected visitor. "May I help you, Kane Fletcher?" he said, removing his hat. The gesture looked awkward, as if he was trying to remember social niceties from long ago. "I live up in the mountains about 10 miles north. I came to bring you this." He held out a package wrapped in oilcloth. Penelope approached cautiously and took it, finding it surprisingly heavy. When she unwrapped it, she discovered 3 books, their covers worn but intact. A collection of Shakespeare's plays, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, and a natural history of the Rocky Mountains. "I heard you were a teacher and that the school did not have many books," Kane said, his eyes fixed somewhere over her left shoulder, as if meeting her gaze directly was too much. These were my mother's. She would have wanted them used. Penelope looked up at him, touched by the gesture. This is incredibly generous, Mr. Fletcher. Are you certain you want to part with them? I do not read much anymore, he said, finally meeting her eyes. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. They should be with someone who will appreciate them. I do appreciate them very much, Penelope said, clutching the books to her chest. Your mother must have been a remarkable woman. Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain. She was. She loved learning, loved books. She taught me to read using those very volumes. He paused, then added, she would have liked knowing there was a real school here now with a proper teacher. Was she a teacher herself? Penelope asked, curious about this woman who had raised such an enigmatic son. She wanted to be, Kane said. But she married my father instead and came west. He was a trapper, and they lived in the mountains. She died 10 years ago when I was 18. The simple statement carried a weight of grief, and Penelope's heart went out to this rough mountain man who still mourned his mother a decade later. I am so sorry, she said softly. Kane shrugged, a rolling motion of those massive shoulders. It was a long time ago. I just wanted you to have the books. He started to turn away, and Penelope found herself speaking without thinking. Mr. Fletcher, wait, would you like some coffee? I was about to make some, and it is a cold ride back to the mountains. He turned back, surprise clear on his face. I do not want to impose. It is not an imposition, Penelope said, and realized she meant it. There was something about this man that intrigued her, some combination of his rough exterior and the gentleness he had shown in bringing her his mother's treasured books. Please, I would enjoy the company. Kane hesitated, then nodded once. Coffee would be welcome. Penelope led him to the small cabin behind the schoolhouse, acutely aware of his presence behind her, like a wall of warmth against the freezing air. Inside, she busied herself with the coffee pot while Kane stood near the door, looking too large for the small space. You can sit, Penelope said, gesturing to the chair by the tea table. I promise I do not bite. The corner of his mouth quirked, almost a smile. That makes one of us. Penelope laughed, surprised by his dry humor. Should I be concerned? Only if you wander into the mountains unprepared, Kane said, settling into the chair with surprising grace for such a large man. The wilderness does not forgive mistakes. I shall remember that, Penelope said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. She handed him one and sat across from him, cradling her own cup for warmth. Have you always lived in the mountains? Born there, Kane said. My father built our cabin when he first came west, and I have been there ever since. I trap mostly some hunting. Bring furs and meat down to Cody to trade for supplies a few times a year. That sounds like a solitary life, Penelope said. Kane studied her over the rim of his cup. It suits me. I am not good with people, with crowds and conversation. The mountains make sense. People rarely do. Penelope understood that sentiment more than he could know. I spent my whole life surrounded by people in Philadelphia, and I felt alone every day, she said quietly. Sometimes being solitary is better than being lonely in a crowd. Kane's eyes sharpened with interest. Why did you come here? A woman like you, educated, from a wealthy family, by the look of your clothes. Cody is not where people like that usually end up. Maybe I was tired of being what everyone expected, Penelope said. Maybe I wanted to find out who I could be if I stopped trying to fit into someone else's idea of my life. He nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. People in town say you left a wedding to come here. They talk. Penelope felt her cheeks flush. Small towns always do, I suppose. Yes, I left my fiancé 3 days before our wedding. It was not fair to him, but it would have been less fair to marry him when I knew I could never be the wife he wanted. What kind of wife did he want? Kane asked. A quiet one, Penelope said. One who did not ask questions or have opinions or dream about things beyond her parlor. He told me I daydreamed too much, that I needed to focus on practical matters. Kane was quiet for a moment, his calloused fingers wrapped around the coffee cup. Then he said, my mother used to daydream all the time. She would stare at the mountains and tell me about the places she imagined existed on the other side. My father hated it, said she was wasting time. But I always loved listening to her dreams. They made the world seem bigger, full of possibilities. Penelope felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. That is exactly it. Dreams make life feel less narrow. Then it was a damn fool thing to try to stop you from dreaming, Kane said bluntly. A woman with dreams is a woman who is alive. Why would anyone want less? The simple statement, delivered in his rough voice, touched something deep inside Penelope. She had spent years being told her imagination was a flaw, a failing that needed to be corrected. To hear someone say it was a virtue, that it was part of being alive, felt like a balm on an old wound. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "That means more than you know." Kane looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, his gaze sliding away. "I should go. Storm is coming in tonight, and I need to get back before it hits." Penelope walked him to the door, sorry to see him go but understanding the practicality. "Thank you again for the books, Mr. Fletcher. They will be treasured, Kane," he said, pausing in the doorway. "Just Kane, and you are welcome, Miss Ashford." "Penelope," she offered, "if we are being informal." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Then, just before he stepped out into the cold, he turned back. "Your dreams, Penelope. Keep them. Do not let anyone make you feel foolish for them." He was gone before she could respond, striding toward the large horse tied near the schoolhouse. Penelope watched from the window as he mounted in one fluid motion and rode north toward the mountains, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a figure from a legend. That night, as the promised storm howled outside, Penelope sat by the fire and paged through Kane's mother's books. She found notes in the margins, small observations and thoughts written in a delicate hand. This woman had loved these books, had lived through them while trapped in the harsh reality of mountain life. Penelope wondered if Kane's mother had found happiness, or if she had spent her years longing for the dreams she had set aside. She promised herself then that she would not set her dreams aside. She would find a way to be practical and a dreamer both, to teach these children while also exploring this wild new world she had chosen. And if the image of a certain mountain man's blue-gray eyes kept returning to her thoughts, well, perhaps that was just another dream to add to her collection. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Penelope taught her students 6 days a week, slowly gaining their trust and respect. She adapted her teaching to fit their needs, incorporating lessons about the natural world around them alongside traditional subjects. When she taught geography, she used the mountains and rivers they knew. When she taught mathematics, she framed problems around trading furs and calculating supplies for winter. The children responded to her warmth and genuine interest in their lives. Even Thomas Jr., the gangly teenager who had been ready to dismiss her, began participating in lessons, particularly when she introduced the Shakespeare plays and let the students act out scenes. Sarah, the little girl who dreamed of cities, became Penelope's shadow, always eager to help and hungry for stories about the wider world. Penelope also began to integrate into the community of Cody. She attended church services, helped organize a social at the town hall, and earned the respect of the town council with her dedication to her students. The women of the town were curious about her, this educated Easterner who had given up comfort for their rough frontier settlement. Some, like Mr. Brennan's wife Eleanor, became genuine friends. Others remained suspicious, waiting for Penelope to reveal herself as either a fool or someone running from scandal. But through all of this, Penelope found her thoughts returning to Kane Fletcher. She had not seen him since that afternoon in February when he brought the books, though she had asked Eleanor about him. "Kane is a good man, but a solitary one," Eleanor had said, kneading bread dough in her warm kitchen. "His father was a hard man, a drunk who got mean when he had whiskey in him. Kane's mother was a gentlewoman who made a terrible mistake marrying him. She endured years of misery before she died of fever. Kane was just 18 when it happened, and he has lived alone in that mountain cabin ever since." "Does he never come to town?" Penelope had asked, trying to sound casual. 3 or 4 times a year, usually to trade furs or buy supplies. He keeps to himself, does not drink or cause trouble. Some of the unmarried women have tried to catch his interest over the years, but he never bites. I think he saw what marriage did to his mother and decided he wanted no part of it. The information had made Penelope sad, thinking of Kane alone in the mountains, avoiding human connection because of his father's cruelty. But she told herself it was none of her business. He had made his choice just as she had made hers. March arrived with slightly warmer weather, though snow still fell regularly. Penelope had been in Cody for nearly 6 weeks and felt she was finally finding her footing. She had stopped feeling like an outsider and started feeling like she belonged to this place, to this community. Her students were making remarkable progress, and she had even started a small lending library using Kane's books and several donated by families in town. It was on a Saturday in mid-March that Penelope decided to take a walk beyond the town limits. School was finished for the week, and she was restless with energy. She borrowed a pair of practical boots from Eleanor, bundled herself in her warmest coat, and set out to explore the area beyond Cody's main street. The day was clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever. Penelope followed the river north, marveling at the way the ice had begun to break up along the edges, revealing the dark water beneath. She walked for perhaps an hour, lost in a thought in the beauty of the landscape, before she realized she had wandered quite far from town. She was just considering turning back when she heard it, a low, rumbling growl that made every hair on her body stand straight. Penelope froze, her heart suddenly thundering, and slowly turned her head. 20 feet away, standing between her and the path back to town, was a bear. It was huge, brown, and clearly just emerging from winter hibernation, its small eyes fixed on her with dangerous intent. Penelope's mind went blank with terror. She had read about bears, knew they lived in these mountains, but reading about them and facing one were entirely different experiences. The bear took a step toward her, and she instinctively stepped back, her foot sliding on ice. She went down hard, landing on her back, the impact driving the air from her lungs. The bear moved closer, and Penelope could smell it now, wild and musky. She tried to remember what she was supposed to do. Play dead? Run? She could not think, could not breathe, could only stare at death approaching on 4 massive paws. A gunshot shattered the air. The bear reared up, roaring, and Penelope saw a figure charging down the slope to her left. Kane Fletcher, moving with surprising speed for such a large man, fired another shot into the air. The bear, apparently deciding this was too much trouble, dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the trees. Kane reached Penelope in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" Penelope tried to answer, but she was shaking too hard. Kane did not wait for a response. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest, and started moving quickly back toward town. "I cannot believe you were out here alone," Kane said, his voice tight with anger and fear. "What were you thinking? Bears are waking up hungry, and a woman alone is easy prey." "I did not know," Penelope managed, her hands fisted in his coat. She could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, and it grounded her. "You could have been killed," Kane said, his arms tightening around her. "If I had not been checking my traps nearby, if I had not heard you walking along the river." He did not finish the sentence, but Penelope understood. She had come within minutes of dying, torn apart by a hungry bear in the wilderness she had been so eager to explore. The terror of it hit her all at once, and she started crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Kane stopped walking and held her close, one large hand cradling the back of her head. "You are safe now," he said, his voice gentling. "I have got you. You are safe." He carried her all the way back to Cody, not setting her down until they reached her cabin. Inside, he set her carefully in the chair by the cold stove and immediately set about building a fire. Penelope watched him through tear-blurred eyes, seeing the competent way he handled the wood and kindling, the quick efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime surviving in harsh conditions. When the fire was blazing, Kane turned to her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Can you manage, or should I fetch one of the women from town?" Penelope looked down and realized her coat and skirts were soaked from her fall on the ice and the snow Kane had carried her through. She was already shivering, her teeth chattering. "I can manage," she said, though she was not entirely certain that was true. Kane nodded and turned his back, giving her privacy. Penelope struggled out of her wet things with shaking hands, managing to get into a dry dress, though she could not manage all the buttons. She wrapped a quilt around herself and said, "I am decent." Kane turned back, his eyes sweeping over her to assess her condition. "You need something hot to drink. Tea?" "There is some in the tin on the shelf," Penelope said, pulling the quilt tighter. She felt utterly foolish now, a city girl who had nearly gotten herself killed through ignorance and carelessness. Kane found the tea and set about making it, moving around her small kitchen with surprising ease. He brought her a cup of strong, hot tea and then pulled the other chair close to the fire, sitting beside her. "I am sorry," Penelope said quietly. "You were right to be angry. I was foolish." "I was not angry at you," Kane said, his voice rough. "I was terrified. When I saw that bear moving toward you, I thought." He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I have seen what bears can do. It is not a good death." Penelope looked at him, this man who barely knew her but had been terrified for her safety. "Thank you for saving my life. I owe you everything." Kane shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I am just glad I was nearby." He paused, then said, "But you need to understand, Penelope. The wilderness out here is beautiful, but it is dangerous. You cannot wander off alone without understanding the risks. There are bears, mountain lions, wolves. There are cliffs and rivers and weather that can turn deadly in minutes. I know that now, Penelope said, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. I thought I was being adventurous, exploring my new home. I did not realize how unprepared I was. Kane was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he said, I could teach you. Penelope looked up, surprised. Teach me what? How to survive out here. How to read the signs of animals, what to avoid, how to move through the wilderness safely. If you are going to live in Wyoming, you should know these things. He seemed almost embarrassed by the offer, his gaze sliding away. I mean, if you want to learn, I am not much of a teacher. Penelope felt warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back the last of the cold fear. I would like that very much, she said softly. If you are willing to take the time. Kane nodded, something easing in his expression. I come to town once a month for supplies. I could come more often, take you out to teach you about the land. It would have to be on Sundays after church, so you do not miss your teaching. That would be perfect, Penelope said, and realized she was smiling despite everything that had happened. The prospect of spending time with Kane, of learning from him, made something flutter in her chest. They sat by the fire as the afternoon faded into evening, Kane making sure Penelope was fully recovered from her shock. He told her stories about the mountains, about the animals that lived there and the patterns of the seasons. Penelope listened, fascinated not just by what he said but by the way he spoke about the wilderness with such deep knowledge and respect. You love it up there, she observed. The mountains, the solitude. I do, Kane admitted. It is where I feel most like myself. The mountains do not expect anything from me except that I respect them. There is a peace in that. I think I understand, Penelope said. I felt trapped my whole life by expectations, by what everyone thought I should be. Coming here was the first time I felt like I could breathe. Kane's eyes met hers, and there was understanding there, a recognition of kindred spirits. Your family must think you are crazy. They do, Penelope said with a small laugh. My mother wrote me a letter last week. She said I had humiliated them, ruined my prospects, and thrown away everything they had worked to give me. She said I would regret this foolishness and come crawling home within 6 months. Will you? Kane asked. No, Penelope said firmly. I am happier here, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, than I ever was in Philadelphia society. I have purpose here. I matter. Kane smiled then, a real smile that transformed his hard face into something almost gentle. You do matter. Those children adore you. Sarah talks about you constantly when I see her family at church. You have made a difference in just a few weeks. Penelope felt her cheeks warm with pleasure at his words. You go to church? Eleanor said. You rarely come to town. I started coming more often, Kane said, then seemed to realize what he had admitted. He stood abruptly, reaching for his coat. I should go. You need to rest. Penelope stood too, letting the quilt fall from her shoulders. Kane, wait. Will you really come back to teach me? You do not have to feel obligated because you saved me. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I want to come back. I have wanted an excuse to come back since the day I brought you those books. The admission seemed to cost him something, and he looked away quickly. I will be here next Sunday after church. Dress warm and wear practical clothes. I will, Penelope promised. Her heart beating faster, Kane nodded and headed for the door, but he paused with his hand on the latch. Penelope, I am glad you came to Cody. The town is better for having you in it. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the dusk. Penelope stood in the doorway, watching him ride away, and felt something shifting inside her chest. She had come to Wyoming to escape an unwanted future, to find herself and her dreams. She had not expected to find someone who seemed to understand her, who looked at her dreams and saw value instead of foolishness. She thought about his words. I will make sure her dreams come true daily. He had not said exactly that, but his offer to teach her, to share his knowledge of the wilderness, felt like he was offering to help her dreams become reality. He was not dismissing her curiosity about this wild place. He was encouraging it, making it safe. Penelope closed the door and leaned against it, a smile spreading across her face. She had nearly died today, but she felt more alive than ever, and next Sunday she would see Kane again. The thought made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unexplored, something that both terrified and thrilled her. The week passed slowly. Penelope threw herself into teaching, but her mind kept drifting to Sunday, to Kane, to the promise of adventure. She mentioned to Eleanor that Kane had offered to teach her about the wilderness, and Eleanor had given her a knowing look. That man has not shown interest in a woman in all the years I have known him, Eleanor said. But he looks at you differently. Like he is seeing something he did not know he was missing. He barely knows me, Penelope protested, though her cheeks were hot. Maybe that is why, Eleanor said. No expectations, no preconceptions. Just two people seeing each other clearly. Sunday morning arrived cold but sunny. Penelope attended church service in the small wooden building that served as Cody's place of worship. She spotted Kane immediately, sitting in the back row, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt with his hair tied back. Their eyes met across the room, and he nodded, a small gesture that made her pulse quicken. After the service, Kane was waiting by his horse, holding the reins of a second, smaller mare. "Borrowed her from the Brennans," he said when Penelope approached. "You will need to learn to ride properly if you want to explore these mountains." Penelope eyed the horse nervously. She had ridden before, but only placid city horses on gentle trails. This mare looked spirited and wild. "I am not sure I am ready for that." "You will be fine," Kane said, his voice confident. "I will be right beside you." He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, and then swung up onto his own horse with easy grace. They rode out of town at a walk, heading north along the river. Kane kept a careful eye on Penelope, offering quiet corrections to her posture and grip on the reins. Once they were well away from town, Kane began to teach. He showed her how to read animal tracks in the remaining snow, how to tell the difference between deer and elk, between wolf and coyote. He pointed out the subtle signs of danger, claw marks on trees that indicated bear territory, the eerie silence that meant a predator was near, the way birds would flee before a storm. "The wilderness will tell you everything you need to know if you learn its language," Kane said, dismounting to examine a set of tracks. "Most people never learn to listen. They are too busy making noise." Penelope dismounted as well, crouching beside him to look at the tracks. She was acutely aware of his nearness, the way his shoulder almost touched hers. "What made these?" "Mountain lion," Kane said. "Big one, male probably. These tracks are a few days old, but this is his territory. We will not stay long here." They remounted and rode on, Kane leading them to a high meadow that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Cody looked tiny from this height, a small collection of buildings dwarfed by the immensity of the landscape. "It is beautiful," Penelope breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I never imagined anything could be this beautiful." Kane watched her instead of the view, his expression unreadable. "You see it differently than most people. They see hard work and danger. You see wonder." "Is that bad?" Penelope asked. "No," Kane said. "It is rare, precious." They sat on a fallen log, sharing the lunch Penelope had packed, and talked about everything and nothing. Kane told her about his mother, how she had tried to bring culture and learning to their isolated cabin, reading to him every night and teaching him to appreciate beauty even in harsh circumstances. Penelope told him about her life in Philadelphia, the suffocating expectations and the growing sense that she was living someone else's life. "Do you miss it?" Kane asked. "The comforts, the society?" "No," Penelope said honestly. "I miss my grandmother, who died 2 years ago. She was the only one who understood me. But the rest of it, the parties and gossip, and pretending to be someone I was not, I do not miss any of it." "You are brave," Kane said quietly. "Most people do not have the courage to walk away from everything they know." "Or I am foolish," Penelope said with a laugh. "My family certainly thinks so." "No," Kane said firmly. "Brave. It takes strength to choose your own path." They rode back as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. At the edge of town, Kane pulled his horse to a stop. "Same time next Sunday?" he asked. "I would like that," Penelope said, not wanting the day to end. Kane hesitated, then said, "I enjoyed today. More than I have enjoyed anything in a long time." "So did I," Penelope admitted. He smiled that rare transformative smile and then rode away. Penelope returned the borrowed horse to the Brennans and walked back to her cabin in a daze. One day with Kane, and she felt like her world had expanded. She was beginning to understand that her feelings for him went beyond gratitude or friendship. There was something deeper stirring, something that both excited and frightened her. The pattern continued through March and into April. Every Sunday after church, Kane would be waiting with 2 horses, and they would ride into the wilderness. He taught her to fish in the cold streams, to identify edible plants, to build a fire with damp wood. But more than the practical skills, he shared his love of the mountains with her, showing her secret valleys and hidden waterfalls, places he said he had never brought anyone before. Their conversations deepened with each outing. Kane spoke about his father's cruelty, the violence he had witnessed, and how he had sworn never to become that kind of man. Penelope shared her fears about never being enough, always failing to live up to expectations. They talked about dreams and regrets, hopes and fears, until it felt like they had known each other for years instead of months. The people of Cody began to notice. There were whispers and speculation about the schoolteacher and the mountain man, but Penelope ignored them. What she had with Kane felt too important to worry about gossip. It was on a warm Sunday in late April that everything changed. They had ridden further than usual, to a valley where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. Penelope dismounted and walked among them, laughing with delight at the explosion of color after so many months of white and gray. "They are beautiful," she said, turning to find Kane watching her with an intense expression. "Yes," he said, but he was not looking at the flowers. Penelope's breath caught. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. She took a step toward him, and he closed the distance in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I should not do this," Kane said, his voice rough. "You deserve better than a man who lives alone in the mountains." "You should let me decide what I deserve," Penelope said, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart racing under her palms. "Kane, I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. I did not come here looking for this, but I cannot deny it anymore. I have been drawn to you since the moment I saw you in that schoolhouse," Kane admitted. "You were so determined, so alive, and every moment I have spent with you since has only made me want you more. But I do not know how to be with someone, Penelope. I have lived alone for so long." "Then we will figure it out together," Penelope said. "If you want to try." In answer, Kane bent his head and kissed her. It was tentative at first, almost careful. But then Penelope rose on her toes and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened. Kane's arms came around her, lifting her off her feet, and Penelope felt like she was flying and falling at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "I want to try," he said. "I want you in my life, Penelope. I want to make your dreams come true. Every single day." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes. "That is all I have ever wanted. Someone who sees my dreams and wants to help them grow instead of cutting them down." They stood there in the meadow of wildflowers, holding each other, as something profound and permanent settled between them. Penelope knew that her life had just taken another dramatic turn, but this time she was not running away from something. She was running toward something, toward a future she could barely imagine but desperately wanted. The ride back to Cody was different. They held hands when the trail was wide enough, stole kisses when they were certain they were alone. At the edge of town, Kane pulled her close one more time. "I want to court you properly," he said, "with your permission." "You have it," Penelope said, smiling, "though I suspect the entire town will have opinions about it." "Let them," Kane said. "I do not care what anyone thinks, I only care about you." The news spread through Cody within days, carried by well-meaning neighbors who had spotted Kane and Penelope riding together, looking decidedly like a couple in love. The reactions were mixed. Some, like Eleanor and Mr. Brennan, were delighted, saying they had seen it coming for weeks. Others were concerned that Penelope was making another rash decision, throwing away her reputation by associating with a reclusive mountain man. Penelope addressed the concerns head-on at a town council meeting. "I appreciate everyone's worry for my well-being," she said, standing before the assembled leaders of Cody. "But I am 22 years old and capable of making my own decisions. Kane Fletcher is a good man, an honorable man, and I care for him deeply. That is all anyone needs to know." Thomas Brennan nodded approvingly. "Miss Ashford is right. Kane has never caused trouble in this town, and he has proven himself a friend to our community many times over. If they wish to court, that is their business." The matter was settled, though Penelope knew some would continue to gossip. She did not care. For the first time in her life, she was choosing what she wanted, instead of what was expected, and it felt glorious. Kane began coming to town every Sunday without fail. He would attend church, endure the curious stares and whispered conversations, and then spirit Penelope away for the afternoon. Sometimes they rode into the mountains, sometimes they walked by the river, sometimes they simply sat in her cabin and talked for hours. He was courting her in his own way, learning how to open up after years of isolation. He brought her gifts from the mountains: a perfectly preserved bird's nest, a piece of quartz that sparkled in the light, wildflowers pressed between pages of his mother's books. Each gift came with a story, a piece of his world that he was sharing with her. Penelope fell more in love with him every day. She loved his quiet strength, the way he listened when she talked about her students or her dreams for the future. She loved how he never tried to diminish her enthusiasm or make her feel foolish for wanting to explore and learn. Instead, he encouraged her, teaching her everything he knew and praising her quick mind and brave heart. In May, invited her to his cabin for the first time. They rode up on a Saturday afternoon after Penelope had finished her week of teaching. The trail was steep and winding, climbing high into the mountains where the air grew thin and cold even in spring. Kane's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a view of the valley that made Penelope gasp. It was larger than she had expected, sturdily built with a stone chimney and real glass windows. "My father built it to last," Kane said, dismounting and helping her down. "It has survived 15 winters up here." Inside, the cabin was neat and surprisingly comfortable. There was a large stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a proper stove, and a loft that served as a sleeping area. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, mostly about nature and survival, but also a few volumes of poetry and literature. "Your mother's influence," Penelope said, running her fingers over the spines. "She tried to bring beauty to this place," Kane said, standing close behind her. "She planted flowers every spring, even though the deer would eat them. She read to me every night, even after working all day. She never gave up trying to make this cabin feel like a home instead of a prison." Penelope turned to face him, seeing the old pain in his eyes. "It must have been hard watching her struggle." "It was," Kane admitted. "I was young, but I knew my father made her miserable. He drank and raged and blamed her for everything wrong in his life. She had married him thinking she could change him, that love would be enough. It was not." "Is that why you stayed alone so long?" Penelope asked gently. "Because you were afraid of repeating their story?" Kane nodded slowly. "I told myself I was better off alone, that I could not hurt anyone if I never let anyone close. But then you came to Cody, and everything I thought I knew about myself changed." "How?" Penelope asked, her heart racing. "You made me want more," Kane said simply. "You made me believe that maybe I could have something good, something real. You are not afraid of me, not put off by my rough ways or my solitary life. You see me, Penelope, the real me, not the scary mountain man the town whispers about." Penelope reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palms. "I do see you, Kane. I see a man who is gentle despite his strength, who honors his mother's memory by being everything his father was not. I see someone who makes me feel safe and challenged and alive all at once." Kane turned his head and kissed her palm, then pulled her into his arms. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, before Kane showed her around the rest of his property. There was a small barn for his horse and pack animals, a smokehouse for preserving meat, a root cellar stocked with supplies. "You are completely self-sufficient up here," Penelope observed. "I have to be," Kane said. "In winter, the trail can be impassable for weeks at a time. I learned early to prepare for every eventuality." They spent the afternoon together, and Kane cooked dinner over the fire, venison steaks with wild onions and potatoes from his root cellar. As the sun set, painting the cabin in golden light, Penelope realized she did not want to leave. This place, with its rugged beauty and profound peace, felt like a home in a way Philadelphia never had. "I should get you back before dark," Kane said reluctantly as they cleaned up after dinner. "What if I did not want to go back?" Penelope said, the words out before she could stop them. Kane went very still. "Penelope, are you saying what I think you are saying?" Penelope took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I love you, Kane, I love you, and I want to be with you. Not just for Sunday afternoons, but truly together. I want to marry you." The words hung in the air between them, bold and irrevocable. Kane stared at her, his expression unreadable, and for a terrible moment, Penelope thought she had misjudged everything. Then Kane crossed the room in 3 long strides, lifted her off her feet, and kissed her so thoroughly that she forgot how to breathe. When he finally set her down, his eyes were blazing with emotion. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Penelope. I think I have loved you since the moment you offered me coffee in your cabin and looked at me like I was a person worth knowing." Penelope laughed, tears streaming down her face. "We are both crazy. We have known each other for less than 3 months. I do not care," Kane said fiercely. "I wasted 10 years being alone because I was afraid. I am not wasting any more time. If you will have me, I am yours." They were married 2 weeks later in Cody's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Kane wore his cleanest shirt with his hair neatly tied back. Thomas Brennan walked Penelope down the aisle, and Eleanor cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, Penelope looked into Kane's eyes and saw her future reflected there. It would not be an easy life, split between the schoolhouse in town and the cabin in the mountains, but it would be theirs. They would make it work because they both wanted it, both needed it. The town threw them a celebration at the hall with music and dancing and more food than Penelope had ever seen. Kane was stiff at first, uncomfortable with so much attention, but he relaxed as the evening wore on, particularly when Penelope pulled him onto the dance floor. "I do not know how to dance properly," Kane muttered as she positioned his hands. "Neither do I, really," Penelope admitted. "Just follow the music and hold me close." They managed something that was almost a waltz, moving awkwardly but happily in the crowded hall. Around them, other couples danced, and children ran between the tables, and the whole town celebrated their union. It was perfect in its imperfection. As the sun set, Kane and Penelope slipped away, riding north toward the mountains under a sky full of stars. They did not go all the way to the cabin. Stopping instead at a small line shack Kane maintained halfway up the trail. It was simple, just one room with a fireplace and a bed, but it was private and perfect for their wedding night. Kane built up the fire while Penelope lit the lanterns, both of them nervous and eager. When Kane turned to her, his expression was open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I want to make you happy," he said. "I want to give you everything you dreamed of and more." "You already have," Penelope said, going to him. "You saw my dreams and did not laugh. You did not tell me to be practical or sensible. You said you would help make them come true, and you have. Every Sunday, every ride into the mountains, every moment with you has been a dream becoming reality." Kane kissed her then, tender and passionate at once, and they came together as husband and wife with a sweetness that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. Later, wrapped in quilts in each other, she traced the scars on his chest from a life lived hard and whispered promises of a future lived together. The first year of their marriage required compromise and creativity. Penelope continued teaching during the week, living in her cabin in town, while Kane managed his trapping and hunting in the mountains. But every Friday after school, Kane would ride down to collect her, and they would spend the weekend at the mountain cabin together. On Sunday evenings, he would ride her back to town in time for the school week. It was not ideal, but it worked. Penelope found she loved the rhythm of it, the way she could be part of the town community during the week, and retreat to mountain solitude on weekends. She loved her students and took pride in their progress, but she also cherished those days in the cabin with Kane, learning more about survival and wilderness and falling deeper in love with both the land and the man. Kane, for his part, adapted to having another person in his life with surprising grace. He who had lived alone for so long discovered he loved having someone to come home to, someone to share meals and stories and the quiet evenings by the fire. Penelope brought light and laughter to the cabin, filling it with joy in a way his mother had tried to do but never quite managed. In the fall, Kane took Penelope on a week-long trip into the deep wilderness, teaching her advanced survival skills and showing her places few white people had ever seen. They camped under the stars, cooked over open fires, and made love in a meadow where elk grazed at dawn. It was the most romantic week of Penelope's life. By the time they returned to civilization, Penelope had news. She was pregnant. Kane received the information with wonder and terror in equal measure. "I will not be like my father," he said that night, holding her close. "I will love this child and protect it and never let it feel unwanted or afraid." "I know you will," Penelope said, cradling his face. "You are nothing like him, Kane. You are good and kind and strong in all the ways that matter." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Penelope continued teaching until December, when the town council insisted she take maternity leave. Eleanor and the other women of Cody rallied around her, providing advice and supplies and support. Kane was overprotective, worrying constantly about Penelope and the baby. He came to town more frequently, much to the amusement of the locals who had never seen the solitary mountain man so domesticated. But Penelope loved seeing this side of him, the tenderness he showed when he placed his hand on her growing belly and felt their child move. The baby came in March of 1876, during a late winter storm that trapped Kane and Penelope at the mountain cabin. Eleanor had insisted Penelope should be in town when the baby was born, close to the doctor, but Penelope had wanted one more weekend at the cabin. She had miscalculated her timing. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Kane feared he would lose both wife and child. But Penelope was strong. stronger than even she had known, and just before dawn she delivered a healthy baby boy. Kane held his son for the first time as the sun rose over the mountains, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Penelope, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Kenneth Franklin Fletcher, honoring both his parents with his initials. Kenneth had dark hair like his father and gray-blue eyes that seemed to see everything. From his first day, he was alert and curious, taking in his world with serious attention. Once the storm cleared, Kane rode down to Cody to fetch Eleanor and the doctor, who confirmed that both mother and baby were healthy. The town celebrated the birth with gifts and visits, everyone wanting to see the baby who had made Kane Fletcher smile so much. Penelope returned to teaching that fall, bringing baby Kenneth with her to the schoolhouse. The children adored having a baby in the classroom, and the older girls fought over who got to help mind him during lessons. Kenneth seemed to enjoy the attention, growing into a happy, active toddler who loved stories and climbing on everything. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and messier but infinitely richer. Kane split his time between the mountains and town, adjusting his trapping routes so he could be home more often. He proved to be a devoted father, spending hours playing with Kenneth, teaching him about nature and the world even though the boy was too young to understand. 2 years later, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Patricia Ann Fletcher. Patricia was the opposite of her serious older brother, a laughing, sunny child who charmed everyone she met. Kenneth adored her, appointing himself her protector and constant companion. As the children grew, Penelope and Kane made the difficult decision to move permanently to town during the school year, only spending summers at the mountain cabin. It was hard for Kane, giving up his solitary wilderness life, but he did it without complaint because his family needed him. He found new purpose in Cody, using his wilderness skills to help the growing community. He taught men how to hunt and trap more efficiently, led rescue parties when people got lost in the mountains, and became the person everyone turned to in a crisis. The scary mountain man became a respected member of the community. All because of his love for Penelope and their children. Penelope continued teaching for 10 years, watching her students grow and graduate and start families of their own. Sarah, the little girl who had dreamed of cities, went on to become a teacher herself. Inspired by Penelope's example, Thomas Jr. became a rancher, and many of her other students stayed in Cody, building lives and raising children of their own. When Penelope finally retired from teaching at 32, she did so knowing she had made a lasting impact. The schoolhouse was now a thriving institution, and the town had hired another teacher to take her place. Penelope was ready to focus on her family and her own dreams. She and Kane decided to move back to the mountain cabin full-time. Kenneth was 8, and Patricia was 6, old enough to handle the isolation and help with the work of mountain living. They would send the children to school in town during the winter months, boarding with the Brennans, but the mountains would be their true home. The years that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. She had her family, her books, and the vast wilderness she had grown to love as much as Kane did. She wrote in journals about their adventures, documenting the natural world around them and the life they were building together. Kane taught the children everything he knew: how to read tracks, how to fish and hunt, how to respect and understand the wilderness. Kenneth grew into a quiet, capable boy much like his father, while Patricia remained sunny and social, always making friends with everyone she met. In 1883, Penelope gave birth to their third child, a son they named Kyle Frank Fletcher. Kyle was a surprise, born when Penelope was 30, and he completed their family in ways she had not known they needed. He had his mother's adventurous spirit and his father's love of the mountains, and from the moment he could walk, he was exploring everything. The children grew up wild and free, educated by their parents and the land itself. They learned to read and write from the books in Kane's cabin, learned mathematics from helping their father calculate trap lines and hunting seasons, learned science from observing the natural world around them. Every winter, they would return to Cody so the children could attend formal school and maintain connections to the wider world. Penelope and Kane wanted their children to have choices, to be able to live in civilization if they chose, even though they had chosen the mountains. As the years passed, Penelope and Kane's love only deepened. They had built something rare and precious, a life that honored both their dreams and their realities. Kane had learned to be part of a family, to open his heart and trust in love. Penelope had found the freedom and adventure she had always craved, along with a partner who supported her every step. They still took trips into the deep wilderness, just the two of them, leaving the children with friends and Cody. On these trips they would rediscover each other, talking for hours about everything and nothing, making love under the stars and marveling at how far they had come from that first meeting in the schoolhouse. "Do you ever regret it?" Kane asked her one night, lying beside a campfire in a high meadow. "Giving up your comfortable life for this?" "Never," Penelope said firmly, snuggling against his side. "This is the life I was meant for. You are the person I was meant to find. Everything that came before was just prologue." "I think about that day I brought you the books," Kane said, his arm tightening around her. "I almost did not go. I almost convinced myself that you would not want them, that I would just be bothering you." "I am glad you did not listen to that voice," Penelope said. "You changed my life, Kane. You took a dreamer who everyone said was impractical and foolish, and you said my dreams were worth pursuing. You said you would help make them come true, and you have. Every single day." Kane kissed the top of her head. "Your dreams made my life worth living again. Before you, I was just surviving, going through the motions. You taught me that there was more to life than just enduring it." They lay there in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. Kenneth grew up to become a wilderness guide, leading hunting and fishing expeditions into the mountains and sharing his father's knowledge with a new generation. He married a girl from Cody, a rancher's daughter named Margaret, and they had 4 children who grew up running wild between town and mountains just as Kenneth had. Patricia, true to her social nature, married a merchant from Denver and moved to the growing city. But she visited every summer with her own children, and Penelope loved watching her daughter thrive in the world she had chosen. Patricia opened a bookshop in Denver and became known for her warm personality and excellent recommendations, bringing the love of learning her mother had instilled in her to a wider audience. Kyle, the surprise baby, grew up to be a naturalist and writer, documenting the wildlife and landscapes of Wyoming in articles and books that brought national attention to the region. He traveled extensively but always returned to the mountains, building his own cabin near his parents' property and living much as his father had before marriage changed his life. As Penelope and Kane grew older, they slowed down but never stopped adventuring. They took shorter trips into easier terrain, but they never gave up exploring their beloved mountains. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading to each other from the books that had started their relationship, watching their grandchildren play in the same meadows where they had fallen in love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Kane took Penelope back to the Valley of Wildflowers where he had first kissed her. The flowers were in full bloom, just as they had been that spring day so long ago. "I have loved you every day since that moment," Kane said, holding both her hands in his. "You took a lonely man and taught him how to live again. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Fletcher." Penelope smiled through happy tears. "You took a woman everyone said daydreamed too much and made every dream come true. You never asked me to be less than I was. You only ever encouraged me to be more. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." They renewed their vows there in that meadow, just the two of them in the mountains as witnesses, reaffirming a love that had only grown stronger with time. The years continued to pass, bringing new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Penelope and Kane became legends in Cody, the teacher and the mountain man whose love story had become part of the town's history. Young couples would ask them for advice, and they always said the same thing. Find someone who sees your dreams and wants to help you achieve them. Find someone who makes you want to be better, and never stop choosing each other every day. In their 70s, Penelope and Kane finally slowed down significantly. They spent most of their time at the mountain cabin, surrounded by children and grandchildren who came and went like the seasons. Kane's hair was white now, and Penelope's hands were wrinkled and spotted with age. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love in a meadow of wildflowers. One morning in late spring, after a night of gentle rain, Penelope woke to find Kane already up and standing at the window, looking out at the mountains he had loved his entire life. "Good morning," she said, joining him and slipping her hand into his. "Good morning, my love," Kane said, his voice still deep and strong despite his age. "I was just thinking about all the adventures we have had, all the dreams that came true. We have been blessed," Penelope agreed, leaning against his solid presence. Even in his 70s, Kane was strong, his body still muscled from a lifetime of hard work. "I have one more dream," Kane said, turning to face her. "I want to spend every remaining day making you happy. I want to see you smile every morning and hear you laugh every evening. I want to hold your hand and watch the sunset over these mountains that brought us together." "That is my dream too," Penelope said, her eyes bright with tears. "We have built such a beautiful life." "Kane, sometimes I can barely believe it is real." "It is real," Kane assured her, pulling her close. "It is real because we fought for it, because we chose it every single day. Because I met a woman who dreamed big and I decided her dreams were worth fighting for." They stood there at the window, two old people who had loved each other for decades, who had built a family and a life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision. Around them, the cabin was filled with evidence of their life together. Books and photographs, children's drawings and hunting trophies, pressed flowers and journals documenting years of adventures. Kenneth arrived that afternoon with Margaret and two of their grandchildren, bringing news from Cody and supplies from the general store. Patricia sent a letter from Denver, full of news about her bookshop and her children's latest accomplishments. Kyle was due to visit next week, bringing his wife and their young daughter. As evening fell and the family gathered around the dinner table, Penelope looked at the faces of her children and grandchildren and felt overwhelming gratitude. She had walked away from a safe, prescribed life and had been rewarded with something infinitely richer. She had found love and adventure, purpose and joy, all because she had dared to follow her dreams. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or returned to their own homes, Penelope and Kane sat on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. "Do you remember what you told me when we first met?" Penelope asked. "That your mother loved to daydream, and your father hated it." "I remember," Kane said. "I remember thinking that any man who tried to kill dreams was a fool. And you told me to keep my dreams, to never let anyone make me feel foolish for them," Penelope continued. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, though I did not realize it at the time." Kane smiled and brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I knew right then that you were special, a woman who dreamed of more, who had the courage to chase those dreams. I wanted to be part of that, wanted to help make those dreams come true." "You did," Penelope said simply. "Every day, just like you promised. You took a girl who everyone said had her head in the clouds and taught her that the clouds were worth reaching for." They sat in comfortable silence, two souls perfectly matched, as the night deepened around them. In the distance, a wolf howled, and Kane automatically identified it as the alpha from the pack that denned in the northern valley. Penelope smiled, remembering how terrified she had been of the wilderness when she first arrived, and how Kane had patiently taught her to understand it instead. "I love you," Penelope said, the simple words carrying the weight of decades of shared life. "I love you too," Kane replied, his voice warm and certain. "Now and always." As they finally headed inside for the night, Penelope took one last look at the mountains that had become her home, at the stars that had witnessed their love story unfold, and felt complete. She had come to Wyoming running from a future she did not want, and had found a future beyond her wildest dreams. The years continued to be kind to them. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, surrounded by a growing family that showed no signs of slowing down. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, and each new baby was brought to the mountain cabin to receive their blessing. Penelope continued to write in her journals, documenting not just their adventures but the wisdom she had gained over a lifetime of living deliberately and joyfully. Kane read her entries sometimes and was always amazed at her perspective, at the way she could find beauty and meaning in the smallest moments. "You should publish these," he told her one afternoon when he found her writing at the table, sun streaming through the window. "Your story could inspire others." "Our story," Penelope corrected, "and maybe someday. For now, I am content to simply live it." Kane leaned down and kissed the top of her head, marveling as he always did at the luck that had brought this woman into his life. He had been content with solitude, convinced that isolation was safety. Penelope had shown him that true safety came from love, from vulnerability, from opening your heart even when it was terrifying. As they entered their 80s, both still remarkably healthy and active, thanks to a lifetime of physical work and clean mountain living, they began to think about the legacy they would leave. Kenneth and his family were well established, carrying on the traditions of wilderness living and respect for the land. Patricia's bookshop was thriving. bringing literature and learning to Denver. Kyle's writing had made the Wyoming wilderness famous across the country, bringing recognition and protection to the lands his parents loved. "We did well," Kane said one evening, surveying their domain from the porch. "Our children are happy and successful, our grandchildren are thriving. We built something that will last." "We did," Penelope agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "But more than that, we lived. We really truly lived. We did not just survive or endure. We embraced every moment, every adventure, every dream." "No regrets?" Kane asked, as he always did. "Not a single one," Penelope said, as she always answered. On a golden afternoon in early autumn, when Penelope was 83 and Kane was 85, they took one last ride together into the mountains. It was shorter and slower than their youthful adventures, but no less meaningful. They returned to all their favorite places: the meadow where they first kissed, the hidden waterfall where they had celebrated their first anniversary, the high overlook where they could see for miles in every direction. At the overlook, they sat on the same fallen log where they had shared lunch on their first Sunday together, holding hands and watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. "If I could go back and do it all again," Kane said slowly, "I would not change a single thing, except maybe I would have brought you those books sooner." Penelope laughed, the sound still bright and joyful despite her years. "Everything happened exactly as it was meant to. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "You are right," Kane said, squeezing her hand gently. "You are always right about these things." They rode back to the cabin as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors that seemed almost unreal in their beauty. That night, they fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for nearly 45 years, comfortable and content and deeply in love. The following spring, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin to celebrate Penelope and Kane's 45th wedding anniversary. 3 generations filled the cabin and spilled out onto the surrounding property, bringing laughter and chaos and overwhelming love. Kenneth and Margaret, now grandparents themselves, had organized the celebration with help from Patricia's family and Kyle's. There was more food than anyone could eat, music from fiddles and guitars, and storytelling that went on for hours. As the sun began to set, Kenneth called for everyone's attention. "We wanted to do something special for Ma and Pa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They have given us so much. Not just material things, but an example of how to live with love and courage and integrity." Patricia stepped forward, holding a leather-bound book. "Kyle and I worked together on this," she said, tears already streaming down her face. "It is a collection of your stories, Ma, from all your journals. We had it printed so that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all the generations to come will know about your incredible love story." She handed the book to Penelope, who opened it with shaking hands. There, beautifully typeset and illustrated with photographs and drawings, was her life with Kane. The story of a woman who daydreamed too much and a mountain man who said those dreams were worth pursuing. The story of how they built a life together that honored both their dreams and their love. Penelope could not speak through her tears, so Kane spoke for both of them. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. "Thank you for loving us, for letting us be ourselves, for understanding that sometimes the most important thing we can do is support each other's dreams. Your mother taught me that. She showed me that love is not about changing someone or making them fit into a mold. It is about seeing who they truly are and helping them become even more themselves." The celebration continued into the night, with dancing and singing and more stories. Penelope and Kane were surrounded by love, by the family they had created and the legacy they were leaving behind. As the party finally wound down and people began settling in for the night, Penelope and Kane slipped away to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The moon was full, casting silver light across the landscape. 45 years, Penelope marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was stepping off that stagecoach, terrified and excited all at once." "You were so brave," Kane said, his arm around her shoulders. "Coming to a place you had never been, taking a job teaching children you had never met, all because you wanted something more than what was expected." "I was running away," Penelope corrected. "But I found something to run toward when I found you." "We found each other," Kane said, "and we chose each other every day since. That is what I am most proud of, Penelope. Not the children we raised or the life we built, though those are wonderful. I am proud that we kept choosing each other, kept working to make our relationship strong and our dreams come true." Penelope turned to look up at him, at the face she had loved for so long. Even in his 80s, Kane was handsome, his eyes still that startling blue-gray, his presence still commanding. But more than his physical appearance, she loved the man he was, kind and strong, patient and passionate, endlessly supportive of her dreams and her growth. "I would choose you again in every life," she said softly, "in every universe, in every version of reality. You are my great love, Kane Fletcher." "And you are mine," Kane replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. "My dreamer, my partner, my everything." They stood there under the moon, two old people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them, who had built something beautiful and lasting from nothing but courage and commitment and deep, abiding love. The years that followed were gentle, full of quiet moments and surrounded by family. Penelope and Kane slowed down even more, but they never stopped making plans and dreams. They talked about all the places in the mountains they still wanted to visit, the things they still wanted to learn, the time they wanted to spend with their ever-growing family. On a warm summer day, just after Penelope's 85th birthday and Kane's 87th, they took a walk to the meadow of wildflowers. It was a short walk now, but they made it at their own pace. Hand in hand as always, the flowers were in spectacular bloom, carpeting the meadow in every color imaginable. Penelope stood in the center, turning slowly to take it all in just as she had done so many times before. "Still beautiful," she said. "Still perfect," Kane agreed, watching her instead of the flowers. They sat on the grass, something they would not have risked even a few years ago, and talked about their life together. They remembered their first meeting, their courtship, their wedding. They remembered the birth of their children and grandchildren, the adventures they had shared, the quiet moments that had meant just as much as the dramatic ones. "I think we succeeded," Penelope said at one point. "We took our dreams and made them real. We did not let fear or expectation or other people's opinions stop us from building the life we wanted." "You succeeded," Kane said firmly. "You were the brave one, Penelope. You left everything you knew to chase a dream of something more. I just had the good sense to recognize that your dream could include me." "We both succeeded," Penelope insisted. "You had to be brave too, Kane. You had to overcome your fear of intimacy and commitment. You had to trust that love did not have to look like your parents' marriage. We both had to be brave." Kane nodded, accepting her point. "Then we were brave together. That is the best kind of brave." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, then slowly made their way back to the cabin where Kyle and his family were waiting with dinner. That night, surrounded by the laughter and chaos of family, Penelope looked at Kane across the crowded table and mouthed, "I love you." He mouthed it back, his eyes warm with affection and satisfaction. That night, as they lay in bed, Penelope said, "I have had a beautiful life, Kane. The most beautiful life I could have imagined." "So have I," Kane replied, pulling her close. "Because of you. Always because of you." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Penelope dreamed of meadows full of wildflowers and mountains touching the sky, and a man with blue-gray eyes who had promised to make her dreams come true daily, and he had, every single day for 46 years. He had seen her dreams and made them his mission, had supported her and encouraged her and loved her exactly as she was. In the morning they woke together as always, ready for another day of life and love and the quiet joy of simply being together. They had breakfast with Kyle's family, watched their great-grandchildren play in the clearing around the cabin, and made plans for the day ahead. "I want to pick some flowers," Penelope announced, "for the table." "I will come with you," Kane said immediately, as she had known he would. They walked slowly to the edge of the property where wildflowers grew in abundance, and Penelope gathered a bouquet while Kane watched, his expression soft with love. Back at the cabin, she arranged them in a jar on the table, pleased with how they brightened the room. "Perfect," Kane said, kissing her cheek, "just like you." The days blended into weeks and months, each one a gift. Penelope and Kane celebrated their 46th anniversary surrounded by family, and then their 47th. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, saw new babies born, and marveled at how their love had rippled out to create this vast, beautiful family. On a crisp morning in late September, just after the aspens had turned gold, Penelope and Kane sat on their porch, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the mountains. It was a morning like thousands of others they had shared, unremarkable except for the sense of profound contentment that filled them both. "I am grateful," Penelope said softly, "for all of it, every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would not trade this life for anything." "Neither would I," Kane said, reaching over to take her hand. "You gave me everything, Penelope. A family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. You took a lonely, scared man and taught him how to love. You were never scary to me, Penelope said. From the moment I met you, I saw your kindness. I saw the man you were trying to be, the man your mother would have been proud of. And you became him, Kane. You became everything you hoped to be and more. They sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and strong, the same mountains that had witnessed their love story from its beginning. As the years continued, Penelope and Kane aged gracefully, their love only deepening with time. They were well into their late 80s now, moving slower but still sharp of mind and warm of heart. They spent their days quietly, reading and talking and watching the world turn around them. They received visitors constantly, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. Each visitor left with the same sense of having witnessed something rare and precious. The love between Penelope and Kane was visible in every glance, every touch, every word. They were an example of what love could be when two people truly chose each other, truly supported each other's dreams and growth. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family organized a massive celebration in Cody. The town had grown significantly since Penelope first arrived, but it still retained its frontier charm. A banner hung across Main Street, "Congratulations, Penelope and Kane Fletcher, 50 years of love." The celebration filled the town hall and spilled out into the street. People came from all over Wyoming and beyond to honor the couple who had become legends in their own time. Former students, now elderly themselves, came to thank Penelope for the education she had given them. Hunters and trappers came to honor Kane for his knowledge and generosity. Family filled every available space, 3 generations strong. When Kenneth asked his parents to say a few words, Kane helped Penelope to her feet, and they stood together before the crowded room. 50 years ago, I married the bravest woman I have ever known, Kane said, his voice still strong despite his age. She had left everything familiar to chase a dream of something more, something better. I was lucky enough that her dream included me. And I married a man who never tried to clip my wings, Penelope added, her voice warm with love. Who never told me my dreams were foolish or impractical, who instead said, "Good, I will make sure those dreams come true daily." And he kept that promise for 50 years. The room erupted in applause and cheers. As the noise died down, Patricia stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Ma, Pa, you gave us all a gift," she said. "You showed us what real love looks like. Not the easy romantic version from books, but the real thing that requires work and compromise and choosing each other every single day. You showed us that supporting each other's dreams is not a burden but a privilege. That being married does not mean giving up who you are, but becoming more fully yourself. Thank you for that example. Thank you for everything." The celebration went long into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Penelope and Kane sat in places of honor, holding hands and watching their legacy unfold before them. Every person in that room existed because they had chosen love, had chosen each other, had built something beautiful from nothing but courage and commitment. As the party finally wound down, Kane leaned over and whispered in Penelope's ear, "Ready to go home?" "Always," Penelope replied, and they slipped away into the night, riding in a wagon driven by Kenneth, because they were too old now for the long ride on horseback. Back at the mountain cabin, they sat on the porch one more time, looking at the stars. 50 years, Penelope marveled. Half a century. When I was getting on that stagecoach in Philadelphia, terrified and excited, I never imagined this would be my life. "Better than your imagination?" Kane asked. "So much better," Penelope said fervently. "The best dreams are the ones that surprise you, that exceed anything you could have planned." "Then I am glad I got to be part of your best dream," Kane said, kissing her temple. They sat there until the cold drove them inside. 2 old people who had loved each other for half a century and would love each other for whatever time remained. Inside the warm cabin, surrounded by memories and mementos of a life fully lived, they went to bed as they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for one more day together. The final years were gentle. Penelope and Kane spent most of their time at the cabin, content with their routines and each other's company. They read together, talked about everything under the sun, and received a constant stream of visitors who came to pay their respects and hear their stories. Penelope continued writing in her journals almost until the end, documenting not just events but the profound sense of satisfaction she felt about her life. She had dreamed of adventure and love and purpose, and she had found all 3 in abundance. Kane remained her devoted companion, Still protective, still supportive, still looking at her with the same love he had shown that day in the meadow of wildflowers so long ago. Even as their bodies weakened, their love remained strong, the foundation on which they had built everything. One autumn afternoon, when Penelope was 90 and Kane was 92, they sat together on the porch wrapped in quilts, watching the aspens turn gold. "I am tired," Penelope admitted softly. "Not unhappy, just tired. I know," Kane said, holding her close. "I am too. But I am not afraid," Penelope continued. "I have lived such a beautiful life, Kane. I have loved and been loved. I have raised children and watched them raise their own. I have seen my dreams come true 1,000 times over. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," Kane agreed. "You have lived well, my love. We both have." They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Around them, the wilderness continued its eternal cycle, indifferent to human concerns but beautiful beyond measure. "Thank you," Penelope said quietly, "for seeing my dreams and making them your mission, for never making me feel foolish or impractical, for loving me exactly as I am. Thank you for teaching me how to live again," Kane replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For showing me that love does not have to hurt, that opening your heart is not weakness but strength, for giving me a family and a purpose and the happiest years of my life." They remained on the porch until the stars began to emerge, then went inside to the warmth and comfort of their home. That night they lay in bed talking about their favorite memories, laughing at old stories and marveling at how quickly the years had passed. "If you could give advice to your younger self," Kane asked, "what would you say?" Penelope thought for a moment. "I would tell her to be brave, to trust that walking away from what is expected might lead to something beyond imagination, to believe that her dreams matter, that they are worth fighting for. And I would tell her that the man she will meet in a schoolhouse one winter day will be the great love of her life, so do not be afraid when it happens." "Good advice," Kane said softly. "I would tell my younger self that isolation is not safety, that his mother was right to value dreams and beauty and love, even when his father mocked her for it, that when a brave, beautiful woman walks into his life, he should not waste a single moment before pursuing her." "We did well," Penelope said, snuggling against his chest. "Did we not? We took our broken pieces and built something whole." "We did," Kane agreed, his arms tightening around her. "We did very well indeed." Penelope Ashford Fletcher passed peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later, her hand still held in Kane's. She was 90 years old and had lived a life of adventure, love, and purpose that had exceeded her wildest dreams. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, and she was laid to rest in a small cemetery outside Cody, with a view of the mountains she had loved so much. Kane stood at her graveside, supported by his children, and said his final goodbye to the woman who had changed his life. "You made every dream come true," he whispered, "just as I promised. I hope I made yours come true too." He did not last long without her. 3 months later, on a snowy December morning, Kane Fletcher joined his wife. His children found him in the mountain cabin, sitting in his favorite chair by the window, looking out at the peaks where he had spent his life. He had a peaceful expression on his face, and in his lap was one of his mother's books, the same collection of poetry he had given to Penelope so many years ago. They buried him beside Penelope, and on their shared headstone the family inscribed, "Kane and Penelope Fletcher. They dreamed together, built together, loved together, an example for all who follow." The legacy they left was immense. Their children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the values Penelope and Kane had instilled: courage, integrity, support for each other's dreams, and deep love for family and land. The mountain cabin became a family retreat, maintained lovingly through the generations, a place where descendants could connect to their remarkable ancestors. Kenneth published a book about his father's wilderness knowledge, preserving Kane's skills and wisdom for future generations. Patricia's bookshop became a Denver institution, still run by her children and grandchildren. Kyle's writing brought fame and protection to the Wyoming wilderness his parents had loved, helping to establish parks and preserves that would last forever. But more than their tangible legacies, Penelope and Kane left something intangible but infinitely more valuable: proof that two people from different worlds could build something beautiful together. That supporting each other's dreams was not a sacrifice but a privilege. That real love meant seeing someone completely and loving them not despite their quirks and dreams, but because of them. Years later, when Kenneth's great-granddaughter asked him about Penelope and Kane, he told her the whole story. About the city girl who came west chasing a dream of something more. about the mountain man who had lived alone until he met someone worth opening his heart for, about how they built a life together that honored both their dreams and their deep, abiding love. The lesson, Kenneth said, is not that you need to run away to find yourself, or that love will solve all your problems. The lesson is that you need to be brave enough to know what you want and courageous enough to pursue it. And when you find someone who sees your dreams and says, "Good, let me help make those come true," you hold on to them with everything you have. The story of Penelope and Kane became family legend, told and retold through the generations. It became a story the town of Cody told to newcomers, part of the mythology of the place. It became a story that inspired others to be brave, to dream big, to love deeply and without reservation, and in a way, they never really left. On autumn afternoons when the aspens turn gold, people swear they can see two figures riding through the mountains hand in hand. In the meadow of wildflowers, locals claim they sometimes feel a presence, a sense of deep joy and love that lingers in the air. And at the old cabin, now carefully preserved as a historic site, visitors report feeling a profound sense of peace, as if the love that had filled that place for so many years had soaked into the very walls. Whether these stories are true or simply the human need to believe that great loves never truly end, they persist. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of all, that Penelope and Kane's love was so profound, so genuine that it became immortal, inspiring generation after generation to be brave enough to dream and wise enough to find someone who will help make those dreams come true. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the material things they accumulated or the physical places they inhabited, but the love they shared and the example they set. They showed that it was possible to break free from expectation and build something authentic and beautiful. They proved that supporting each other's dreams did not diminish either person, but instead elevated both. They demonstrated that true love was not about changing someone to fit your needs, but about celebrating who they already were and helping them become even more themselves. Penelope had been told her whole life that she daydreamed too much, that she needed to be more practical, more sensible, more grounded. But Kane had looked at her dreams and seen not foolishness but possibility. He had said in essence, "Good, I will make sure those dreams come true daily." And he had kept that promise for more than 50 years, until death finally parted them. And in doing so, they had created something that would last far beyond their mortal lives. A love story that reminded people what was possible when two brave souls found each other and decided to build a life together, dream by dream, day by day, choice by choice. Their story became a beacon, a reminder that the best life was not the easiest or most expected, but the one that was chosen deliberately, built consciously, and filled with love that was both given and received in equal measure. And that, in the end, was the greatest dream of all.